Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guests and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we're thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. The presenters will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. And if you ask a question in the chat box and we don't have a chance to get to it, go ahead and leave your phone number as well. We will make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. We want to make sure this presentation is as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. Well, I'd love to introduce you to today's moderator. And Eric, I forgot to ask how to pronounce your last name.
Bohm.
Okay, just how it's spelled. Okay, Eric Bohm is a partner and co-founder of Stonebridge Asset Management. He brings international and institutional investment perspectives to the team, having begun his financial career in the Czech Republic, working for both a local bank and an emerging equity fund. Eric holds degrees from New York University's Stern School of Business, Johns Hopkins SAIS, and Georgetown University. He obtained the Charter Financial Analyst designation in 2002 and the Certified Kingdom Advisor designation in 2007. He and his wife have 2 children and reside in Signal Mountain, Tennessee. On his off hours, he can be found spending time with his family, playing soccer, pursuing spiritual growth with like-minded Christian men, and leading mission trips to the Czech Republic. And Eric, why don't you go ahead and say hello, make sure everyone sees your face.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming. Looking forward to this webinar and hope it's educational for you.
Great. Love to introduce you to today's speaker. Stephanie Martin is the president of College Living Experience and has spent her career working with students with varying disabilities of all ages. Being an educator first and foremost, Stephanie brings her unique perspective and unwavering passion of supporting the special education community through the innovative services of College Living Experience. Stephanie focuses on co-creating an environment where students have a maximized opportunity to be their own self-determined advocates with the necessary skills to be successful. And Stephanie, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and then it'll be your turn to take over, and we're excited to hear what you have to say today.
All right, well, thanks. Thank you for inviting me. Okay. We're going to get started. And the main question at hand, I think, for everyone today is college possible for my neurodiverse teen? And I think that we all come to that particular question with probably slightly different answers. But the very simple answer to this is yes. Mm-hmm. But a simple answer doesn't mean that it's not complicated. So we're going to talk a little bit about what variables could possibly play a role in helping transition a young neurodiverse teen into a post-secondary educational setting. And so some of the possible variables include that individual's readiness, their current skill set, what the scope of the services or the supports are within a program or that post-secondary setting, and most importantly, what are the desired outcomes? What are we looking for? So we're going to use those 4 variables to help drive our conversation today. So the first thing that we can do is we can look at readiness. Along the right-hand side of this particular slide, you can see that there's a website. It's a link to this particular assessment, which is a college readiness assessment. This assessment can be taken either by a parent, a provider, or the individual themselves. It is automatically calculated. It is free. And the goal here is for you to be as honest as possible. It's a confidential assessment. And I love the statement at the top is, remember, if you cheat, you're only cheating yourself. So here's the thing to remember. Simple yes or no answers is all that it's required. So a couple examples would be, does your young adult or do you get yourself up in the morning? Yes or no. And you go through the 15 particular questions, and then it's going to tabulate whether you're ready out of a total of 15. Here's the thing to remember. If it tabulates that you're not ready, it doesn't mean that it's the end of the journey. It just means that it's the beginning of starting what you can work on. So look at, for example, question number 7. Can you or your young adult do your own laundry? If the answer is no, then it's pretty simple. What should you be working on? Doing your own laundry. If you don't have a morning routine and get yourself up in the morning, start working on that. So any question that you've answered no to is the perfect step creating a plan of what you should be working on. Okay.
Stephanie,
Yes.
if you don't mind me stepping in here, as I was looking through these questions prior to this event, I saw many questions that I should have asked about my son before he went off to college. So I guess a question would be, is this something that anyone can use for their kids prior
Absolutely.
to college, regardless of what whether they're neurodiverse or not?
Absolutely. This particular college readiness assessment is not specifically set up for those that are neurodiverse. It is just a general college readiness assessment.
Okay.
I think the difference is that the sooner that you can start to pay attention to some of the no's, and the longer time that you have in advance of getting to practice some of those skill sets, the better off the neurodiverse teen will be once they begin that transition.
Mm-hmm.
Same goes for anybody who isn't neurodiverse, for sure. But this is a great way just to start your journey towards identifying what college or what particular program might be valuable for you.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So once you've completed the readiness assessment, the second thing that you can do is you can start identifying, let me go back, what is important for you in terms of a program. So this is just a basic evaluation and comparison tool. So instead of just having to create, write down all of your notes on different pads of paper, this allows you to compare what's important to you across different programs. So it's a pretty simple, self-explanatory tool. Along the characteristics, there are things that fall into these 4 different domains: academic, career, social, and independent living skills. What you're going to do is read each and every single characteristic and rate for yourself how valuable that is for you or your transitioning young adult. So think about personalized tutoring. Is that important? Yes or no? If it's a no, or it's on the lower end of the scale, you might put it out at a 1 or a 2. If it's important because your son or daughter is going to need that level of specific content tutoring, you might answer it with a 5. So once you go through and you rate how personally important each one of these characteristics are for you and or as a support for your young adult, then you can go back up and you can, along the top line, put in the initials of all the programs that you're looking at. And once you start to investigate and research those particular programs, you're going to go back in and you're going to document how well do they actually serve that particular characteristic. So for example, if you're looking at a university program and they don't have personalized tutoring, that answer they have generic tutoring because they have a tutoring lab or something like that. You might be able to answer that as a 3. The ultimate goal and usefulness or functionality of this tool is that at a glance, you can take a look across the programs and see which programs align most closely with the characteristics that you value the most. Does that make sense? Okay.
I do have a question that
Sure.
came up. Is this something that the parent and student should do together, or the student alone, or the parent alone? Typically, what's the best way to do that?
I think you can do it you can do it multiple different ways. in order to incorporate the voice of the individual who's transitioning, it might be best for them to do it on their own, and then the parent to do it on their own. And then a really nice thing would be to do is to bring them together. Because when you bring them together and you start to compare back and forth, then you're creating an opportunity for a conversation. And so where things align, then that's great, right? And like, yep, I know I need personalized tutoring, or I need support in terms of learning how to do my laundry. Awesome. But where they differ, that's where the conversation starts to come. And that's where you can start to really build on, well, I see it this way, you see it that way. What are we going to do, and how are we going to address this? So it can be done that way. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that it can be done and completed, but it doesn't have to be a single solitary way for completion.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question that's come in, and I'm going to go ahead and answer that, just regarding the access to this particular tool. And Stephanie's email address will be made available at the end of the presentation. So if anyone interested would just email her directly, then she'll make that available to you.
Perfect.
And then also for those of you who are on right now, you can look at the chat box and submit some questions through the chat feature at the bottom.
Okay. So we're going to continue on. What is important here is, obviously there are many different steps to your beginning the journey of determining what college or educational setting is going to be important. But what's really important, folks, is for you to do your research, identify what's important to you, and then go and visit. There's only so much that you can learn online. So tour the program, speak with the individuals that are running it, the staff and the faculty. Most importantly, when and if you have the opportunity, speak to other participants in the program. Ask them questions. They're going to give you the most information than anybody else. Pay attention to culture. So if you go back and you look at and use this tool, and you see that there are 2 programs or 3 programs that are pretty much equal, right, in terms of supporting the things that are important to you, it might come down to culture. And so that's a more subjective kind of variable, right? You can look at the other things that are more objective and factually based, but subjectively, which program is going to support your young adult in a way that they're going to be able to gain the skills necessary to flourish, right? And do it in such a way that the program isn't doing it for them, but they're pushing them forward and they're holding them accountable. Pay attention to culture. And most importantly, for those of you that are parents, be honest and be transparent and share everything that you can about your son or daughter's skill sets, their strengths, and their needs. The program can only be as good as what they know that they have to work with. And so they're better set up to provide those supports when they know exactly what they're going to see with that particular individual. Okay. So the next couple slides, what we're going to do is talk about 3 different sort of iterations of support programs. The first is a wraparound support program. Wraparound support programs are not the college themselves. They're meant to be an additional layers of support for an individual who is already enrolled in some kind of educational institution. So they serve a wide population of neurodiverse individuals with an inclusive approach to independence. They provide educational and academic support, career and vocational, independent living skills, and social development. Now, I can speak more specifically about what those look like from college living experiences perspective, and I'll do that pretty quickly. But before I do that, one thing I think is really important to note is that when a student is enrolled in a support program, they are attending an educational program of their choice. It is not the choice of the support program, but the student's choice. So it could include a community college, a 4-year university or a college, a vocational program, and most importantly, they are taking classes for credit to earn a degree or a viable certificate that will add to their opportunity for viable and sustainable employment in the future. Not all Some wraparound support programs have the flexibility of moving between career and education. And some you can just go ahead and join and just go for the career itself and not necessarily feel obligated to be enrolled in an educational program. So at CLE, the educational and the academic supports quickly, college living experience include content-specific tutoring, support for the student as they enroll in their classes, helping them understand how to navigate the campus and work alongside with their professors. We teach them how to do, we don't do it for them. We may model for them, but again, this is about their experience and giving them the greatest number of opportunities to gain the skills necessary. In addition to educational and academic support, we also provide facilitated study hall. We've also found that a lot of students they struggle to study at home and on their own. So we really provide that structure for them. The career and the vocational support from college living experiences perspective is from soup to nuts. It's from pre-readiness, everything from getting their resumes and their cover letters up all the way through job coaching and helping them understand how to learn the hard and the soft skills. The hard skills are the exact skills that they need to do the job. The soft skills are all the things that make it much more difficult to keep a job. So communication, understanding all of the hidden and unwritten rules that go along with that particular in job setting, all of those kinds of things. And most importantly, CLE will work alongside the employer to help them understand the value of hiring a neurodiverse individual and what that value brings not only to the specific job, but to the brand itself in terms of, because the special education committee or the community is so strong and will support companies and organizations that have a higher number of individuals that are neurodiverse. Independent living skills are just those, are all the life skills that you can imagine. At CLE, students live in an apartment with another student. So it's really about teaching them all the skills of developing and maintaining routines around a house. So everything from building a budget and maintaining it to cleaning and cooking and and grocery shopping. We also work on developing healthy leisure skills, understanding the value of healthy nutrition and exercise. So that's a big, broad definition of the stuff in independent living skills. And then the social development support, we really work on those functional and relevant skills that are unique to each individual. So we have social coaches that meet with them on a regular basis. We have engagement groups that are made up of 4 to 6 individuals, and they're going to focus in on topics that are important to them. For example, healthy relationships, communication, how to set and maintain boundaries, things like that. We also facilitate larger and broader social events over the course of every week. So that's really what a wraparound support program is. Any questions at this point on that particular model? Okay, we're going to continue on. So the second model is really a college or a university program. What's important here is that the individual, the student, must be admitted to the college or the university along the same path that any non-neurodiverse individual is. They provide additional supports beyond the standard accommodations for students diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Those supports can include, but are not guaranteed to include, academic, social, career, and independent living. Based on my understanding and my experience with some of these particular programs, the independent living support is the least robust out of those 4 for a majority of the support programs that exist out there. The university or the college programs typically require an additional fee above the university tuition. That fee can be an annual tuition or based on semesters or quarters, and that would be something to look into. Many of these require a time commitment. Sometimes it's a minimum of 2 years. Sometimes it's a maximum of 2 years. So really look at that too, because if you decide that you want to go to a university program that has an additional support element to it, be aware of the fact that you might be locked into a 2-year commitment. And more often than not, they are specific to individuals on the autism spectrum disorder.
Stephanie, before you move on to the next slide, could I actually ask regarding the previous slide? I've heard about vocational career programs that are available for people with disabilities. Do they do similar things as what you have here on this slide?
From my understanding, no. The vocational and career support programs are strictly geared toward working on employment. And so there are a lot of state-based organizations out there. So the Department of Rehabilitation, Voc Rehab, all of those kinds of things, their single and solitary goal is to help an individual that's neurodiverse get a job.
Okay, got it.
They don't typically have the wraparound supports in terms of the living situation or educational or social. It's really very geared specifically to getting a job.
Okay. And in terms of individual education plans, do colleges have those?
No. So I didn't get into this because that's a whole nother webinar.
Okay.
So in K through 12 education, special education is guaranteed the right to a free and appropriate educational setting through IDEA. And through that, individual educational plans are developed and they are delivered and implemented. When an individual graduates from high school or gets a certificate of completion, those rules and legislation that are wrapped around K through 12 stop. So the university or the college setting is not bound to provide the same level of accommodations that a high school or a K through 12 setting has to. What they are bound to do, sorry about that, is they are bound to provide reasonable accommodations that are within their scope of practice. So an individual that goes into a college setting is going to more often than not access the Office of Disability Services. And within that office, some of the accommodations can include a note taker, the ability to record their lectures, sitting increased time on test, things like that. So the university or the college is not bound to change and or adapt the curriculum or modify it for the individual that's neurodiverse. Their job is to provide the access to the current curriculum, and then it's the individual who has to access additional supports in order to be successful within that setting.
Got it.
You asked a complicated questions.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So then the last one is the college experiential or certificate programs. So certificate programs are designed for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. More often than not, the classes are not taken for credit. It's truly an experiential event. So they will earn a certificate of completion, but one that is not geared towards employment. So it could be that this young woman participated in this 2-year experiential program and she completed it. And so it's not a certificate of a vocational certificate, for example, that might be geared towards culinary arts or dog grooming or anything like that. It's not specific enough that would lend them to have additional skill sets for potential employment. The supports can include, but are not guaranteed to academic, career, independent living, and social. More often than not, there's a limited number of participants, and they also can be time limited. And what's important about the limited number of participants is that they may have a maximum. They may have a maximum that we're only going to serve 15 students every year. So if you're beginning your journey now of figuring out what program is going to be useful for you, make sure you understand if there is a limited number of slots available. And if that's the place that you really want to go, figure out how you're going to get your name on that list if it's a couple years down the line. Okay. So what I want to talk about here a little bit is about success. So as you pursue this journey of entering and transitioning into a post-secondary setting, It's important to make sure that you set yourself up as the parents as well as your child up for success, and it's never too late to start. My recommendation is start much sooner than you ever expect. Start when they're little. And I mean, I'm not talking 4 and 5, I'm talking 18 months, 2 years, start as soon as you possibly can. And so when we think about the term success, we all have our own definitions of it, right? And it's going to have a specific spin on it. But what we do know is that success doesn't mean that life is void of failures or of mistakes. What we do know is that those who experience failure learn from their mistakes and they move through life. So don't shelter your child from making mistakes. It will be the greatest learning tool that they will ever be able to put in their pocket and move forward with. Success can be the sheer will of not giving up in the face of adversity or challenge, and it's about grit. So some of you may be super familiar with grit and others might not be, but Angela Duckworth wrote a wonderful book on grit, and it's The Power and Passion of Perseverance. If you're unfamiliar with her and you don't want to read a book, go to the TED Talks and listen to her TED Talk. It's remarkable. And what she discovered is that success is not solely or directly linked towards intelligence. It can be and often is related to one's grit and how much grit they have. And so what does that mean? In layman's terms, it means, what is your level of resilience? Are you able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and continue on? She found that grit is a combination of passion and perseverance for a singularly important goal. And it's often the hallmark of high achievers in every domain. So what you can do is down along this little right-hand side, there's also a link. And it's a 15-question assessment scale on what your grit is. And everybody can take it. It is not for neurodiverse individuals at all. It's for anyone. So the scale runs from 1 to 5. The higher the grit, the number is towards 5, the more grit you have, the more resilient you are, the better off you are in rebounding from a bump in the road or a challenge. My recommendation in terms of moving through this process, complete the college readiness, complete your evaluation tool, and then get an understanding of what your kid's grit scale is. Okay, because if they're on the lower end, then what that means for all of you is to start to facilitate opportunities where they're going to learn to start to solve some of the problems for themselves on their own. Okay, so that link is available to anybody. It's great. It's well worth doing. So the other thing about this process is, and I think that Marche made reference to this too, in terms of, is this something that I should fill out, or is this something that my son should fill out? Folks, decisions about what a transition looks like cannot be made in a vacuum. And the movement for individuals with disabilities to have their own voice is huge, and it's nothing about us without us. And so if you're unfamiliar with it, become familiar, because it's moving right along. And people with disabilities must be front and center to share their own voice and their experience. And this is the most important. It reinforces the role of people without disabilities as allies and partners who share the road towards inclusion and equality. We are not in the driver's seat. They should be, but we are going to help guide them down that path. And it matters because it unites us with all the marginalized and invisible individuals and groups who are demanding a seat at the table. Most of all, however, it matters because people with disabilities need to be the ones whose voices must lead the way. So be cognizant of this, and most importantly, include your kid. If this is something important for you, and it's going to be far more important for them. So the other thing I made reference to is, well, I'm get to that next, but the other part that I think is really valuable in having a conversation with your young adult is what does adulting mean? What does it mean to be an adult? And on average, the high school or the college bound individual thinks that they're going to go into this brand new environment and they're going to do it all by themselves. They're not going to ask for help. They're going to do it alone. And then when those challenges or those bumps in the road hit, they're kind of lost because they don't have the resources at their fingertips that are going to help them get through this. Talk to them about what it means to be an adult and utilizing your circle of support. So we all have our own circle of support, our friends, our families, our colleagues, professionals in the community that we access regularly. And that circle of support helps us manage our lives. And more importantly, it helps us thrive. If we were to do this by ourselves, it would be very difficult to be successful if we relied on no one else. So what's important here is you have to communicate to your young adult what that circle of support will be now before they transition and what it possibly will look like in that new setting. So talk to them about who will be in their circle of supports. Could it be their roommate, their college advisor, their resident advisor? It could be the Office of Disability Services. It could be the mental health or the hospital associated with the university. It could be the writing lab or their tutor. Anything that they can access that's going to lift them up in that face of adversity is going to help them develop more grit and persevere. So really talk to them about this. And one way that you can help is when you start to or you're in the process of utilizing somebody in your circle of support, highlight it. So I think this is a very simple and maybe sort of silly example, but we all have barbers or hairdressers. And if we didn't have them, that would mean that we would be responsible for cutting our own hair. I'm telling you right now, that's not happening for me in my life. Or you can think about a dentist. What would that look like if you didn't have a dentist or you didn't use that resource? Then you would be responsible for cleaning your own teeth. Talk about that, share that with your child so that they understand and they begin to recognize that you're not living your life independently, independently of any kind of supports. So that's really important to consider and bring forth and be overt about it. And then the next thing, we only have a couple more slides, but the next thing I want to talk about is what you can do to support and promote critical thinking and problem solving. I referenced earlier about how important it is to allow your child to fail and to make mistakes. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't support them in developing the critical thinking skills or the ability to problem solve their way out of a situation. But we know that when a transitioning student goes into a new environment, they're going to be set up with unforeseen, unpredictable, and possibly undesirable circumstances. The last thing that you want is for them to be just like a deer in headlights and like, I don't know what to do. You want to give them the skill set to think through it, to reinforce and reinforce that problem solving at every juncture. A really simple example is, does everybody remember when they were trying to teach their child how to tie their shoe? And how long it took and how little patience that we have at some point, like, oh, fine, we got to go. I'll just tie your shoe. Think about like, well, if the child says, I can't tie my shoe, we can teach them to tie their shoe, but at some point they just, I can't tie my shoe. And then you can say, well, what are you going to do about it? What happens if you don't tie your shoe? What other shoe could you wear? So giving them the process of thinking, what is happening now? Is there something I can do about it? And are there alternative options in front of me that I could pursue because what's right now happening is not working? Okay. It's a very simple example, but something to consider, especially for those of you that might have younger children. But problem solving and critical thinking refers to the ability for us to use knowledge, facts, and data effectively to solve our problems. It doesn't mean that we're going to have a decision or an answer immediately. And more importantly, we probably shouldn't. We need to slow it down a little bit and give anyone the opportunity to think through all of the information before making an educated decision. So some ways to promote critical thinking include becoming more self-aware. What does that mean? That means understanding what's in front of you, what's around you, what resources are present, and am I utilizing those resources or ignoring them? The second part is understanding your mental process. So if you're faced with a challenge and your mental process is typically to say, I give up, I'm going to let my mom handle this, or somebody else can take this, then talk about that and say, what else could I do? Could I do some deep breathing? Could I count a while so that I can de-escalate and I can start to have my brain work again instead of being in that fight or flight kind of situation? But understanding what your mental process looks like is going to be essential for critical thinking. Develop foresight. Understand that if I make this decision or I act on this in this way, what's the potential outcome? If I choose to go with my friends who are partying and I'm not driving, what's the potential outcome of that? Versus, oh, my friends are drinking and driving and my decision to not go, what's the potential outcome for that? And if it's a young adult, it's a toss-up about which one's going to be more important for them because of executive functioning, development, and all of the other kind of stuff. So help your child walk through foresight and figure out, okay, if you make this decision, what are the potential outcomes? And walk them through 3 or 4 different possibilities or probabilities and have them weigh in on which one they think is going to be not the best choice, but have them weigh in on which one they think they would choose, because that then drives the conversation, right? Practice active listening. If you're not familiar with it, it's a lot of nonverbal. It's a lot of nonverbal recognition of what's being said, head nodding, eye gaze, things like that. But most important about active listening is really listening for the information that's coming forth and using that information to help drive your decisions. Part of active listening also includes asking questions. So as parents or professionals, start asking those open-ended questions, those what questions. What are you going to do about it? What happens if you choose this? Instead of why questions or yes, no questions. As a teacher, this is where I would stop and say, why would we not ask a why question? But I'll just tell you the answer. We don't ask a why question because it's subjective and accusatory and judgmental in nature. Why did you do that? So ask a what question. What prompted you to make that decision? It's going to get at the same information, but it's going to do it in such a way that the individual is not feeling judged. So be careful and be cognizant of what kind of questions that you ask, because what you want is to have an open dialogue so that you can start to promote this critical thinking and problem solving. And last but not least is evaluate existing evidence. Review what's in front of you or in front of your child and say, okay, here's all that we know. We know this, 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 and this. Let's figure out what might be a possible solution. And then that goes, it's a full circle. It kind of goes around and around until you land on something that's going to work for everyone involved. So support and promote critical thinking and problem solving as soon as possible. And then last but not least, here are some things.
Stephanie, sorry, if I could just, on regards to that previous slide. So you've given us a good overview of some of these different elements. What are some of the most common gaps that you see in adulting skills in neurodiverse teens?
Well, in the college setting, what I see is when they start to make a mistake, they stop going, they miss a class for some reason. And then they panic because they missed a class. They don't know what took place. And so they're not following back up on the technological platform to see if there were any assignments given. So then they become late in turning in their assignments. And more often than not, 1 missed class leads to 2 missed classes, leads to I'm not going to class anymore. To rather than saying, okay, I missed a class, here's my circle of support, which should always include the professor and professor office hours. And under that circumstance, they need to go in and say, hey, I missed a class. What did I miss? Honestly, students who attend professor office hours have a higher likelihood of persevering through the class and doing well in it and
Mhm.
passing the class.
Right.
So that's a good example of that. Another, so in comparison, if they don't feel that they have to use their circle of support and they have nobody to rely on, then they have no recourse. It's like, I missed a class and I didn't turn in my assignment, so now I'm going to fail the class.
Right.
And it just starts to exponentially grow. And then it doesn't necessarily just land in one class, it feeds into the other classes. And then there are situations in which isolation can happen. Like I'm embarrassed. I've worked with a fair number of individuals who just say, well, I'm going to be 10 minutes late, so I'm not going at all.
Mhm.
And, depending on the professor's grading scale or how their attendance policy, you still might be marked as absent because you're 10 minutes late, but at least you're not missing out on the content that's being delivered. So those are a couple examples of it. I think that in the college setting, there's obviously a lot of unwritten social rules that take place, and helping them understand what's going to best benefit them and put some boundaries around something that's safe and healthy versus something that might not be. So really, it goes from the beginning to the end, but really helping the individual understand what their circle of support is going to be critical.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And another question, in terms of your experience, will parents be able to communicate directly with their child's professors in college or university?
Nope.
No.
Nope. That's the short answer, and that's pretty much the only answer.
Yeah.
Students have the ability to sign off on a FERPA waiver, which allows the parent to have access to their grades and how they're doing on any of the platforms that whatever college or university uses, which is typically the place where they're going to post the assignments and all that kind of stuff. But it is the student's responsibility, because they are adults, to be in direct contact with the professor. I am quite confident that there are parents out there who have figured out ways to circumvent that. My recommendation is for anybody who's tempted to do that, step back. It's time for your child to step up, so step back. If you're communicating with the professor, then you're the one holding the information and not your child. It is your child's responsibility to persevere through the course and not your job. If you're in contact with your child 6 to 10 times a day, take stock of that. What are you doing in those conversations? Are you pushing your child back and saying, what are you going to do about it? Who are you going to ask? What resource are you going to use? Then kudos to you. But if your child comes to you and says, I lost my meal card,
Mhm.
and you say, it's okay, I'll just put $50 in your bank account and you can go buy something at the fast food joint, right? Hey, you solved the problem for them. Instead of saying, what are you going to do about it? What kind of food do you have in your dorm room? Or what do you have in your apartment? And if they say, I have nothing, what should you do? Should you believe them, or should you get on FaceTime or whatever and say, show me your cabinet?
Mm.
Because more often than not, they probably have enough food to survive and be just fine. So don't give in.
Right. Interestingly, based on, as you're giving your answer here, one of the panelists commented that her husband is a professor, and that when he has parents come and contact him, that his response is always to no, have your child come to me. They should be the one coming to me. So yeah, confirming what you're saying.
Absolutely. And it's been that way for a very long time. And could you imagine being a university or a college professor and having, oh gosh, depending on the size of your class, 500 to 1,000 parents contacting you because they want to know what's going on in the class? If they want to know, maybe they should enroll. But honestly, it's not about them. It's about their child, and it's about their student understanding what the structure and the boundaries are within a post-secondary setting and moving through those.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, and then the last but not least here are some basic skills to be working on in no specific order of importance. Basic laundry. Laundry is basic in the sense that you could do it once a week, and if you're not super concerned about mixing colors with whites, who cares? Teach them how to do it. But folks, think about how to teach your child to understand and identify when something is dirty. Is it dirty because it has a stain on it, or is it dirty because it's been worn for 6 times and it has a particular odor to it? How often, things like that. Teach those things, because while most individuals will learn from observation, some individuals might not. You just might need to be more specific in your instruction. Basic sewing. Do they know how to sew a ripped seam? They have a hole in if it doesn't matter to you, it doesn't matter to them, but teach it. This next one is very important, and is how to read a class schedule or a syllabus. And what I put in there next time is a map of the campus, a map of the community, because if they don't know how to read a map, then reading a class schedule or a bus schedule or anything like that isn't going to matter, because they can't even get to where they're supposed to go. Teach them how to book a plane, a train, or any kind of transportation, ride shares, anything like that. At CLE, we really ask every participant to come in knowing how to make, you guys, it's not a lot, 3 basic meals. And those basic meals could be cereal, a sandwich, and a frozen meal, right? We're not asking for anything that's of high culinary importance. We're just asking for sustenance. It could even be how to order pizza. But again, do they know how to at least eat 3 make sure that they can feed themselves 3 separate meals? Household cleaning. The things that we see that are really critical are the bathrooms, the kitchens, and the floors. Do they know how to sweep, or do they know how to use a vacuum? Basic health insurance. Do they know how to access any kind of medical professional if they need to? Do they know how to fulfill a prescription? If they're on medication, do they know how to organize their medication to ensure that they're taking it? Understand how the family is paying for college or any associated costs. How to use a phone and make an appointment. Phone skills. Hey folks, I don't know about you all, but with social media, phone skills have dropped way down on the list of importance for many people. Lots and lots of young adults don't make a phone call ever. They just text, or they use social media. That's not going to always get them through whatever it is they need to do. So, and there's a lot of anxiety that can stand behind making a phone call. Work on those. Know your social security number or any other pertinent information. Work on a budget. If your son or daughter doesn't have a bank account, set one up. Even if it's just, in quotations, a savings account. Understanding that money is not magic is really important, because again, we're not relying so much on dollar bills and change. We've got this plastic card that is pretty magical in nature. You just give it to somebody and they get it back, and all of a sudden you've got whatever it is you want. But understanding where that money comes from and how much you have is relevant. How to treat a common illness or medication, or understanding your medication management, and how to write a professional email. So these are all important, but this is not all that's out there. These are just a few ideas for you to start to focus in on so that you can start. So if we go back and in summary, we look at, and I'll do this last slide in a second. If we go back and look at the process, look at your readiness assessment, complete and fill out the comparison tool, have an understanding of what your baseline grit score is, use all of that information to help devise a plan that you can start working on now prior to transition. So one thing to think about is people are going to say, well, do I do this all now if my child's a sophomore or a freshman in college? The answer is yes. I mean, if you're going to ask any time about transition, the answer is always going to be yes. Because if you're answering no, then you're too late. You're cutting that time frame in which they have the opportunity to learn the skills. You're making it smaller and smaller and smaller. So take advantage of what's in front of you and give them the world of opportunities to gain the skills necessary. So the last thing I want to show is the very last page. And it has my email address on it. And if you are interested in the comparison tool or the evaluation tool, my address is right here. It's smartin@experiencecle.com. If you want to know more about CLE, feel free to click on that link here and you can go, and it'll take you directly to our website. So I'm going to stop sharing. And if there are any additional questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I believe we do have some questions here, and I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Just a second. Eric, you should have gotten those questions.
So Stephanie, what happens if my neurodiverse teen fails a class?
Then they fail a class. It doesn't mean that they failed college. It just means that we need to evaluate. We need to evaluate what caused that particular failure, identify what skills need to be addressed, and the supports that are going to be needed in order for that person to either take that class again or understand maybe it's a class that is not going to be suited for their skill sets or even for the path that they're taking in terms of the education. It doesn't mean that they're a college failure. It just means that they failed the class.
Mm. And here's another question. Will 529 plans pay for post-secondary support programs?
529 plans will pay for university and or colleges because they are accredited educational institutions. Wraparound support programs and some of the experiential programs may not be funded by 529s because they are really a support program and not the educational organization itself. So no.
Okay.
And I think we have time for one more question.
Sure. How can a family use an ABLE account to pay for support and services?
Well, an ABLE account is similar to a 529 plan, except for they are specifically established for families that have individuals with disabilities. Those dollars can be used for any educational, and Marcia, correct me if I'm wrong, any educational support that the family and or the individual deems necessary.
And I would just say, whoever helps you set up that ABLE account would be able to talk to you about the exclusions. There are certain exclusions that an ABLE account won't pay for, but it is certainly a supplement to, and it's not necessarily restricted to like the 529 is. All right, well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for this informative presentation. Thank you so much to Eric and for moderating. On behalf of Advice Chaser, thank you to our participants who have attended and for the organizations that have made that possible. Look for an email soon with a link to the replay of this event, and you're welcome to share that replay with your friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming. We'll see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.